I'm Kass Mourikis. I usually prefer Kass. I'm a sexologist, a sex and relationship therapist, and I work in private practice. And I am here partnering with Wild Secrets. And I'm here in the Wild Secret headquarters with the incredible marketing team behind me. You can't see them. And also the amazing huge clitoris up here, if you can see that. Cool. And I'm at Wild Secret headquarters, and that is also in Melbourne and in Naarm. And Naarm is the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. And so I'd like to take a moment to pause, to say thanks, and to really acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land and who tend to and care for the land that I live and work on. But I'd also really like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country wherever you're joining me from. Australia is and has always been Aboriginal land. So we are speaking about sexual wellness and pleasure this evening. And I'm really curious to know, like, what does pleasure mean? What does sexual wellness, first of all, mean to you? If you feel comfortable, I'd really love if you could share your comments in the chat box. There's a chat box and a Q&A box, so make sure you get it into the right box. Cool, just give you a sec to send anything through. You can't actually see anybody else's responses, but I'll read those out to you. Nothing so far. Molly, can you share to the first slide? Can I repeat the question? What is sexual wellness? What does that mean to you? I'd love to know how you would define it. Someone said being comfortable with my body and with my husband. Sexual wellness is accepting of our bodies as they are. Awesome. It means mixing sense of self with sense of pleasure. Sexual wellness is being confident in your body, no shame. Being satisfied with my love life. Excellent. Will you swap to the next slide? So we've got PowerPoint to share with you. We're having a bit of an issue. Exactly, no body shaming. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your responses. So sexual wellness is a pretty big umbrella term, and it includes a few key things. So it's the right to sexual pleasure, to access care, to be safe from sexual violence and coercion. It also is, it is also your connection to yourself, listening to your body, awareness of what's happening in your body. It's feeling and being safe from violence and sexual coercion, and it's having those systems and structures in place that allow you to access that safety, that care, and all of those things. So being comfortable and connected to your body and feeling worthy as a sexual person. But ultimately, sexual wellness is something that everybody can define for themselves, which is why I invited you to share. Some other people have shared that it means healing sexual trauma, being confident in receiving pleasure and being with my body after trauma. Fantastic, thank you. It's really important to remember that sexual wellness is not just the absence of sexual infection or illness or pain. Sexual wellness is really possible for folks that have pain, that have an STI, that are disabled, that live with chronic illness or other types of pain. A few more comments. I'll get back to those later. Thank you. And so, yeah, if you have a look at this image, sexual wellness, a really big umbrella term. It covers so many different things. Many of these are things that happen at the individual level. So like attraction and desire, intimacy happens in connection with others, mental health, relationships. At the structural level, there are things like safety, but also having access to reproduction rights, abortion, contraception, being able to access shame-free healthcare, having systems and structures in our workplaces and schools and our homes to prevent sexual violence, but also being believed by the people around you, by your caregivers, by the professionals that you reach out to if you do experience sexual violence. And it's also the eradication of shame and discrimination in the workplace and in your school. You can close that one down. So, and of course, a huge part of sexual wellness is pleasure. It's so easy to look at pleasure and think of it as something that is just explicitly sexual, but it's not. Pleasure is possible in everything that we do. Pleasure is what we live for. It's really life-giving. Pleasure is mental, it's emotional, physical, spiritual, relational, and it's political. And pleasure is a very subjective thing. Only you know what it feels like to feel pleasure in your own mind and your own body. Pleasure is things like a really great conversation. It's resting. It's connecting with the people that you love. It's prioritizing and enjoying your hobbies and the things that make you feel alive. And so now I want you to have a quick look at the next slide. In a lot of my sessions, I often invite people to think about and define what pleasure actually means to them. And so for so many people, it is about joy, it's connection, knowing and listening to my body, it's sensory, it's something that I deserve, being my true self, it's power, sexy and empowering, being in the here and now. Someone else said, how I find my way back to my partner and myself after sexual trauma. And it's that sense of aliveness. So like so much of what you already shared is kind of how the people that I work with define what pleasure means for them. And so a huge part of sexual wellness and pleasure is also looking at the barriers and the things that get in the way that make pleasure inaccessible. Thinking of, so if we go to the next slide. Let us just swap over here. Oh, there we go, cool. So looking at this, these are some of the really significant barriers that get in the way of pleasure. But as I'm speaking, please, I invite you again to share what you recognize as some of the big barriers to your pleasure. Feeling safe is a prerequisite for pleasure. Dawn Serra, a fantastic sex educator, says this all the time. Without a sense of safety, without respect, without consent, pleasure is not possible. Have you ever noticed that when you've been really stressed or anxious in a space that has felt maybe violent or where coercion has been present, that you haven't noticed any pleasure in your body or in your mind? And of course, like when your body recognizes that it's not safe, it will go into survival mode. And this is such a protective thing. It will shut down its ability to experience any pleasure, because when it comes to survival, like pleasure does not matter. And so often this looks like your blood going to your heart and your lungs, or your arms and your legs, in order to escape or fight. Blood and focus shifts away from your digestion, moves away from your genitals, moves away from all erogenous zones, because what does that matter? Also, oppression and injustice, very similar to feeling unsafe. How can you access pleasure when you are being oppressed, when every day you experience discrimination in some form? Feeling unsafe as a person in your body will shut down your ability to experience pleasure. And as I said earlier, pleasure is political. So oppression and injustice influence how much pleasure somebody can experience, because who can experience and who is allowed to experience pleasure is not always decided by us as individuals. Not all people feel like they have a right to have pleasure in their body, or to access that pleasure in their body. And so where oppression or discrimination or bias come in, those things significantly restrict access to reproductive choices. People who are commonly discriminated against might not be invited in or prevented from accessing abortion clinics. They might not be able to go and access sexual health centres because of an active fear of being discriminated against by professionals, or being prevented from getting in because spaces are totally inaccessible. And so for people who experience discrimination, they're very likely to actually avoid seeking support. Further down this list, you'll see these systems of oppression, so capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and colonialism. These kind of impact pleasure in lots of different ways, as I mentioned, but also two key things, especially related to capitalism here. So pleasure must be earned. So through grind culture, we learn that it's all work and no play, and that makes Jack a dull boy, because like within grind culture, you are discouraged or shamed for actually stopping and resting. When that happens, you might find yourself thinking that I have to go to the gym and work out before I'm able to like eat this delicious food. I have to finish like heaps and heaps of work before I'm allowed to take a holiday or have a rest. It really prevents you from listening to your body, listening to what you want, what you need. And also sometimes this looks like within a sexual setting, feeling like you have to keep going when you don't want to, continue supporting a partner towards having an orgasm when actually you were finished ages ago and you're feeling uncomfortable and tired. So that's one part. But within capitalism and some other systems of oppression, we learn that pleasure is only for some, and it can only be accessed by people who conform, and conforming to the norm, beauty standards. There is a reason that the beauty industry is a almost $600 billion industry. It uses and capitalizes on insecurities as a political tool to encourage people or teach people to spend their whole lives trying to conform rather than slowing down and connecting with pleasure. Again, if you were here for our first webinar, you would have heard about the accelerators and the brakes. So anything that hits your brakes can also block your access to experiencing pleasure. Again, things like pressure, obligation, expectation, those things tend to leave you really in your head and not very present in your body. So that's a pretty huge barrier to pleasure. And finally, things like shame, fear, guilt, disgust, self-loathing, as well as performance anxiety or performative sex. Those things create the idea of the shoulds, the norms, the script, the thing that you have to conform to in order to experience any joy or be able to listen to what feels good for you. And looking at the comments now, at some of the things that you shared were some of the barriers that are in the way. One of you said, a huge barrier I find is difficulty achieving orgasm, which makes me overthink that I am being difficult and worrying about how long I'm taking, which makes it harder to achieve the pleasure, a vicious cycle. Cool. All right, sounds good. If you have any, stop taking antidepressants. Okay, antidepressants are actually really great. They can make pleasure more accessible. All right, so moving on, a really key part of this conversation is around practices to actually connect with pleasure. How do we overcome or try to address some of the really big barriers? And so things that I find quite significant and that come up in my work a lot are being able to create safety for yourself. So when you think about what do you need to feel safe, what do you need to feel comfortable and relaxed? When you're with a partner, what do you need from them to feel safe? Some pretty good examples of this can be things like practicing ongoing consent, where you're checking in and you're making sure that you're feeling present, reminding yourself that you're actually allowed to say no or to stop whenever you need, being kind and trying not to judge yourself or hold yourself to those expectations, having a really relaxed environment before you actually get started, really regular check-ins again, and encouraging a partner to respond to you with kindness. Those things can actually often create a sense of safety in both your mind and your body. Another thing is very much around setting the mood. So connecting with pleasure is like an accumulative process. Finding a private spot where you're not worried about being interrupted, removing distractions, turning off your phone, turning off the TV, closing the door, cleaning up your space, like whatever it is that you might need, being able to do those things, setting up your environment so it feels really relaxing, and thinking about what is relaxing, what feels good for all your senses. Lighting, do you need soft blankets on your bed? Do you need to burn a delicious smelling candle? Do you need to have music or soft pillows? And then building responsive desire. So starting with smaller sensory sort of engagement. So like gentle touch, movement that feels good, focusing on something arousing or really quite pleasurable to build up and go slowly. Actually, Molly, there's a slide that you can go to for this one. Other things include getting embodied. By being embodied means being present in your body and using all your sensory awareness. So practicing mindfulness is a really good place to start. With mindfulness, it's a really good practice to establish being present in your body more of the time. Like, of course, it would be really challenging if like 90% of your day you're spent in your head in trying to get into an embodied moment, but you're not doing that anywhere else. Of course, that would be really difficult. So practicing that skill is really excellent. But other things that I've got here to be embodied include focusing on your breathing, whether that's doing deep belly breaths, lengthening your exhalation, counting your breathing even, using sound, so humming or moaning, or speaking, or sort of breathing out but making a sound. Maybe that includes listening to your partner's hum or moan or sing or talk. All of those things give you something to really practice focusing on. Using movement is great for being embodied, being able to try new positions, standing up or sitting down, squatting or bending over, maybe rocking side to side or backwards and forwards, practicing shifting where your attention is focused on, and moving your body to create different sensations can really draw you in. Using touch can help you get super embodied. Gently touching your chest or giving yourself like a little hug, or tapping or putting pressure on parts of your body, touching areas that like your erogenous zone, so all those areas that are really sensitive and really tingly, engaging those can bring you back. And finally, sort of deepening your focus with increased sensory stimulation. So that might be using an ice block and like drawing it on yourself, using a a glass toy that you can heat up or cool down and feeling what it's like to have that on you, using feathers or your nails to scratch, or anything that you have around your space. Being able to connect with pleasure through accessible means. And this looks like making pleasure accessible. So using things like sex toys or lube. These things are actually really great tools that can create more and diverse sensation. So I really want to say here that vibrators and other sex toys are not something that you can become desensitized to. They're not a replacement or competition for a partner. They're accessibility devices that make pleasure more accessible. So some different types of sex toys. I want to show you very, very quickly. Vibrators. This one is a sort of an internal, external, great for external stimulation of the clitoris for people that have vulvas. This, again, a external stimulation. They make orgasm more accessible, more reliable. They're for people that want to experience heightened pleasure and who want to maybe have consistent stimulation, or stimulation that changes in intensity, that can make pleasure really possible. They're also really great accessible tools for people that get really tired and fatigued or have pain in their hands or wrists. They might be for people that can't actually access parts of their body for whatever reason, because they're disabled, because that part of their body is out of reach. Here is another type of stimulator, a masturbator, really great for people with penises. There are toys like using butt plugs are really great ways to enhance and reach the external anal nerve endings, internally for people that have prostates, internally for people that want a deeper sense of pleasure that they just can't get with their fingers. And then finally, or not finally, two more. Lube is fantastic. Lube enhances sexual pleasure and it creates more sensation. It protects your body from friction. It reduces the chance of micro tears, which can lead to so much pain and also continue to decrease pleasure, but they increase sensation and glide. Always, always use lube. And then, yeah, finally, really quite a big accessibility thing is hygiene. It's having washed hands and using like a toy cleaner, something to ensure that whatever you're putting into your body is safe. Cool. We've got about 5 more minutes and then we'll get on to our Q&A. But finally, thinking about what feels pleasurable for you. And there's one more slide here, Molly. I'll just start talking. So starting with to know what you want. So figuring out what feels good, how do you know what you want? You can actually really start with what you don't want. Make a list if it helps you to solidify that. Then consider all your maybes. Consider all the things that you might be open to, that you are open to, or that you're willing to try, maybe things that you're curious about, and start imagining how they might feel good for you. What about them do you think might feel good? And what might not feel so good? It's being really curious, being really open-minded to it. Going beyond your genitals. So if you're exploring solo sex, partnered sex, mutual masturbation, mutual masturbation, looking at going beyond your genitals, because focusing on your genitals can really be goal-orientated, which maybe leaves you rushing towards orgasm, rushing towards a higher stimulation than maybe you're ready for. And going beyond your genitals means that you get to explore all the incredible parts of your body that have a lot of nerves, that feel a lot of pleasure. If you have a sexual partner that you want to explore with, explore maybe mutual masturbation, maybe other kinds of sexual experience. Bring in toys, explore what feels really good, explore and try to find novelty if that feels right. Recognizing that pleasure is important and making time for it. To prioritize pleasure, like anything else in your life, it really requires intention. If you love something, if something might feel really good, what would it be like to prioritize that, to make time each day, each week, as a way to say thanks to your body, as a way to challenge the systems that have told you maybe you don't deserve pleasure. Allowing what you notice feels good to kind of direct you or guide you towards what you actually want. So when you're deciding what kind of pleasure you want, paying attention to whether your body is open and relaxed and tingling in response to something, or whether it's closed or shutting down or really tense. You can also really try to prioritize to communicate. So that's communicating both what you want and what feels good. It includes communicating feedback and suggestions for what you want to change, but it also is about advocating for yourself. It's about speaking up and calling out and challenging things that limit or oppress other people's pleasure. Encouraging partners and regularly checking in, asking someone, how would you like to be touched? Inviting someone to touch you and say, how would you like to touch me? Or I'd like to be touched in this way. Finally, deciding to keep learning and exploring. If you want to be able to prioritize and connect with your pleasure, making an agreement with yourself to say, this is important. I want to keep learning, reading, listening to podcasts, coming to webinars and things like this. They create those safe spaces to continue exploring what feels right for you. And remember, it's okay if you don't know what you want. You're not failing. It takes a lot of time to figure out what feels good, to learn about your body. It's okay if that changes, and it's okay if pleasure feels hard or inaccessible at times. Looking at the world that we live in, pleasure can be so inaccessible for so many of us, but that's not your fault. That is what the world looks like. And we all have a responsibility to challenge and change those systems and structures that have those things in place. This is, so I guess we've come to an end of my webinar and my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got something out of that. And now I'd like to actually invite you to start sharing some of your, oh, we've already got some. To start sharing some of your questions into the Q&A box. My screen has just frozen. Has that happened to yours? I'm not sure if anyone else can hear me, but I've just frozen. You can hear me? Okay, cool. It's just frozen on our side. Oh, someone else's, the screen has frozen. Sorry about this, not sure what's happening. I'll keep going, okay. So if you can hear me, all right, I'll keep going. So some of the really great questions that have come through include, so where will I start? So I have a question that says, Anal sex. How do you start doing anal sex? Really great question. Anal is a huge part of pleasure. I actually really encourage you, if you're interested in exploring anal, start externally, maybe even start in the shower and gently stimulate your external anal sphincter, remembering that you have two sphincters, and starting with the external one. Use a little bit of soap in the shower and see how your body responds to that touch. An anal massage with a really great lube, probably a water-based lube, and gently create different types of stimulation around your anal sphincter. So start gently swirling with your finger, pushing in and out without entering. Wait for your body to relax, wait for it to soften and open up. Inserting or rushing to push something inside your body will often result in pain or shutdown, and that can create like a fear response. It can create a lot of pain and discomfort. I know you can't see me right now, but we're working to get another camera sorted. Okay, I can't show you the great toys that I have in a bit more detail. Essentially using a really great lube, exploring slowly, waiting for your body to respond without going too far and too deep is a really great way to approach anal. But have a look at the Wild Secrets websites. There are a number of blogs that actually kind of talk you through this. Let's see. Can you explain why a vibrator that's not insertable might be better for people with trauma? Cool, really great question. So for some folks that do have sexual trauma or other kinds of trauma, having something inserted into their body can be triggering. It can create a sense of discomfort or unsafety, and that makes pleasure inaccessible. And so vibrators that are external for use of the clitoris, but even for use in other erogenous zones of your body. So like those are the highly sensitive parts, stimulating your nipples or putting it on your chest, putting it on your lower back or your butt cheeks. That can be a really great place to become familiar with it. If you have experienced trauma or some other kind of experience, trying to find new toys that have no association with your experience and used in body parts that feel like they're safe and neutral is a really good place. I hope that answers that question. How do you incorporate masturbation for your partner into sex if you orgasm too quickly? So they're probably, early ejaculation. Being able to incorporate masturbation for your partner and for yourself when you feel like you're coming too quickly, really starting to shift the focus away from looking at slow and gentle stimulation, maybe increasing your focus to your breath, so slowing down your breathing, lengthening your exhalation, using mutual masturbation to pleasure your partner, or to kind of just observe and gently touch yourself without sort of finding that too much intense stimulation means you come too quickly. What else have we got? Cool, a lovely question. So I think I'm in love with you, or more to the point, your insight. I've only just been able to get in touch with my sexual honest self I'm almost 47, but now have the best pleasure I'm finding on my own by the things that you just spoke of: movement candles, hot spas, soft pillows, expensive bed linen, drawer full of toys. Oh, thank you. Not a question, but really appreciate you sharing that. Let's see. Does whipped cream help with sensation? Absolutely. Whipped cream could help with sensation, just like how using ice blocks can increase sensation, just like how feathers or toys or vibrators can increase sensation. Food play is such a fantastic experience because it can do some of those things. Should I encourage my wife to explore her body and pleasure? Should I encourage her to masturbate with some toys that I have brought for her when I'm not around to give her confidence in her sexual pleasure? Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to encourage someone to explore pleasure for themselves is a really great place to start. But noticing how your partner, how your wife responds. Is she curious? Does it feel like she is wanting to do it for herself? Like, what are the barriers that might be in the way that could be contributing to some of that resistance? Remember that it's not your responsibility to give your wife confidence in her sexual pleasure. You can actually encourage, but giving her the space to find her own way there and make her own choices about what pleasure products she goes for, how she likes to be touched. Yeah, giving that space is really great. What is the most important thing for me to focus on if my partner has multiple barriers to pleasure? Cool, very good question. Ultimately, starting to understand what those barriers to pleasure are, recognizing what those barriers are that fall inside her control, and what are those barriers that fall outside of her control. Sorry, you just said partner. My apologies, I've just introduced a partner's gender. Looking at what are the barriers to that person's pleasure, and looking at, for the things that fall within their control, how do you actually put things in place? So is slowing down, is focusing on breathing, is focusing on neutral or safe or comfortable touch, is a slow warm up, is taking the pressure off, something that reduces those barriers. Having really good and frequent conversations is probably a pretty good option as well. Being on the same page, understanding what your partner needs to feel safe and comfortable is also really important. I just want to check in and see if you can still hear me. I know that we don't have video at the moment, but how are things from your side? Yep, you can hear. Cool. So, yeah, cool. Sorry about that. Thank you. Cool. So many great questions. Do air sex toys, Satisfier, give good orgasms for the ladies? So air pressure technology, vibrators, I can't show you. I have a few of them here. They can create a lot of stimulation for people because of the way they create pressure and sensation. Often they require, so they can be clitoral stimulators, like external stimulators, and they sit on the clitoris, and they shoot some shoot a jet of air, some create a lot of pressure from the toy. And yeah, they can be really good for people that really like them, and other people prefer vibrators that just sit on the surface of the skin, but using lube for those are really good ideas as well. Thanks for the answer. You're welcome. Just give me a sec to have a look through some of your other questions. We've had so many come in. Really appreciate you sending them. How to cope with trauma from your partner? Not quite sure about this question. It could mean two things. So, and feel free, if you've asked this question, clarify it. If you have experienced trauma and you're trying to connect with your partner, having conversations with your partner around what does it look like for them to be trauma informed, and trauma informed means giving choice, creating options, going slow, not putting pressure on, and having an understanding and awareness of what their experience is like, what their triggers are. If you've experienced trauma and you're trying to connect sexually with your partner, being able to have those really important conversations, talking about what feels really good, where feels neutral in your body to be touched, minimizing or avoiding triggers is something. If by that question, how do you cope with trauma from your partner? If by this you mean you've experienced with trauma from your partner, that can be something really difficult. It's something that unfortunately does happen really often, being traumatized or experiencing sexual violence in a relationship setting and still being within that space. Looking at what you need to feel safe again, looking at what repair and trust building looks like if that's what's happened, putting in really good boundaries. Those things are critical to being able to cope with trauma in whichever regard you meant in that question. Can you explain the importance of using a good quality lube instead of the cheap stuff? Absolutely. A really good quality lube, whether that is water-based, if you're using sex toys, if you're not using water-based, silicone can be really good, but a good quality lube is not tacky. It doesn't feel like you've got like this icky gooey stuff. A good quality lube is smooth. It protects your skin from micro abrasions and tears. It won't destroy your toy. So sometimes, even though it's a water-based lube, you're meant to be able to use water-based lubes with silicone toys because it won't degrade them. There have been people that I've worked with that have bought really cheap lube and have found that that has destroyed or stained their toys. To minimize that, I guess, like really having good toy hygiene, cleaning your toys, something like a foam toy cleaner is really good if that happens, but absolutely an excellent water-based lube will not dry up too quickly. It will last, it'll be smooth. Going for a better quality, really reading the ingredients, making sure that you're not introducing chemicals or other harmful things into your body is important. What's the best way to start using sex toys? I don't want to buy heaps to find out what I like. Is there a way to do a trial? I'm not actually sure. I don't think there is. But coming in, like often in a session, I will guide and encourage people to explore a toy that feels really good for them. Being able to browse on, like, say, the Wild Secrets website and really look at all your different options that you have there. Sometimes being able to connect and talk with like a product professional, because they can encourage and they can guide you. Knowing how you want to stimulate your body as well is also like a pretty key thing. So if you're looking for something you can stimulate in lots of different ways if you're looking for an internal or an external toy. So clitoral stimulation, something you can externally stimulate your penis, something to externally stimulate your external anal sphincter, something to stimulate your nipples. And what kind of stimulation are you looking for? Is it vibration? Is it like a sucking sort of sensation? Trying to think about some of those things can make it a bit easier to figure out like where to get started. But there isn't a trial, but if we find out more, I'll let you know. When is the best time to use water-based, and when is the best time for silicone? So as I sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, water-based lube is really good. It's toy safe. It's not going to degrade toys. Silicone can degrade silicone toys. Silicone can also sometimes degrade some condoms as well. And so using water-based with something else is great. Some people really like silicone to use with mutual masturbation or solo sex. Some people like to use silicone with anal massages or anal intercourse. Sometimes remembering silicone will probably stain your sheets, and that's not always something really great. So maybe using like laying a towel down and using silicone can be good as well. What would you recommend when having trouble with sexual intimacy due to past trauma and you have a new partner? How do I tell them that? Again, another really great question. Having to disclose sexual trauma or some kind of trauma is something that can be very vulnerable, very difficult, and it's not something that everybody is entitled to, information that is. But having a really safe connection with a new partner, trusting that they will respect that, and kind of leading the way. So are they safe enough for you to talk to about what happened, or is that re-traumatizing? Is it more comfortable and more beneficial for your connection to really just talk about the triggers and the impacts that your past experience of trauma has had on you? Trying to find new experiences that you haven't had before can be a great way to get started. Knowing that you can communicate with a partner during the moment when it feels overwhelming, when it feels like you're being triggered, and know that they will respond. Ultimately, deciding whether to tell a partner about your experience with past trauma takes a lot of courage, and it can really strengthen a connection if the person that you're with is willing to receive, and they can do so respectfully, and if they can be trauma informed. How can I ask friends what they are into without crossing any boundaries? Another really good question. So first, kind of testing the water, or even just checking in to say, like, is it okay if we talk about this? Like, what would it be like for you to hear me talk about my dating history or my sexual experience? Is it all right if I ask you questions about intimacy or your own sexual practices? Being able to ask the question about what is okay and what someone is comfortable with before you actually start asking what people are into sexually is great for not already crossing the boundaries. You're figuring out where the boundaries are at. Thanks for asking. Great question. I'm a penis owner and want to encourage my wife to try a vibrator for the first time, but I'm not sure how to start the conversation. Cool. bringing up a conversation with, we've got 10 minutes left. Cool. Thanks, Molly. Bringing up this conversation is, again, like the previous one, like slowly testing the waters, saying, like, is it okay if we talk about pleasure products? Is it okay if I show you this vibrator that I was having a look at? Would you be interested? Are you comfortable if we do that? Waiting for their response, seeing how receptive they are to it, looking at their body, reading their body language. Because it's not for you, it's for your partner. And most partners really care about their partner's pleasure. They want them to be enjoying, they want to know they're having a really good time. And so seeing where they feel, what they're comfortable with, without pushing them into a situation where they don't feel comfortable or where they're likely to shut down, is something you really want to avoid. But look at a website together, like go to Wild Secrets website, have a look, search for, like, filter for vibrators, see what you're interested in together, what appeals, what kind of stimulation do you want. Maybe look at it for a little while before you actually decide what's the right one. Something that is best avoided is actually buying products for somebody else. While it can be a surprise, sometimes that crosses a boundary. Sometimes that feels like too much pressure. And so often I see people disengaging or not feeling drawn to, or just totally avoiding further conversations or using the product at all. How do I talk to my customer about kinks? So assuming that maybe from this question, you might be a sex worker, and looking at what your kinks are. So again, if you have boundaries, like laying those out. What isn't okay for you? What are your preferences? How do you want things to happen? Registering whether somebody is like respectful and able to actually have that conversation about kinks, about pleasure, is probably a good idea too. Checking in what their experience is like, what they're open to, what they're curious about. Talking about kinks is again, it can be a really vulnerable conversation, but such an excellent conversation because kinks are really great. I just want to, so some messages that are coming up in the chat. Could you show us the products next time? Yes, of course. We've actually had some issues with the video tonight. Not sure why it dropped off during that time, but something has gone wrong. I'm glad that you can hear me, and my apologies for the video dropping out. Hopefully we get it sorted last time. Tech issues, it's a pain. Okay, let's see. What about the size? Maybe stigma? No. Not sure about that question. What about the size stimage? And is it important for the counterpart to feel good? I apologize, I'm not actually sure about what that question was asking. Great. Does anybody have any more questions? Oh, stigma. What about size stigma? Cool, thanks. Size stigma, often meaning penis size, I assume, and how that gets in the way. That can be a really big barrier. Often we have this social narrative that bigger is better, bigger is more pleasurable, but that is not actually true. Feeling like if you have a different sized penis, if it feels like it's smaller than what the norm is, then that can make it really hard to connect and feel vulnerable and intimate with somebody. Challenging that, unlearning that, knowing that size doesn't matter, that often it is the motion in the ocean, like what feels good, what is your technique, how do you listen to your partner, how do you ask questions. All of those things are actually more important for your partners to feel good rather than how big you are. Cool. So that's all the time we have for questions. I really appreciate everybody that contributed. I really appreciate you all being here this evening. And I hope you found something useful in exploring sexual wellness and pleasure. Thank you again for joining us. You should receive an email sometime in the next day with a thank you for participating. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a lovely evening.